Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Aiman Mazuki bin Muhammad Zahari, and today I'll be presenting for the International Conference on Islamic Studies, Finance and Management. My topic for today would be the role of youth in Malaysian politics and analysis from young leaders' perspective. So to begin with, let us look at the objectives of my study. There are three objectives for this study. The first is to find out the opinions of the Malaysian youth regarding the political competency of the Malaysian government in handling the COVID-19 pandemic since 2020. Now, the second objective is to find out the views of the Malaysian youth leaders regarding their political tendencies from 2020 until 2022, because 2022 is when the 15th Malaysian general election happened. And thirdly is, how does the Malaysian youth think the Malaysian political landscape should change? What do they want to see change? Now, concerning literatures about the factors of youth political activism, first we have the work by Levi and Akiva. In their studies, they found out that political interests and political efficacy are drivers of youth political involvement. Political interest is, the interest you have towards political matters, and efficacy is how much you think you have the ability to influence political matters. And they find that those two factors are really help youth be involved in political affairs, with educators encouraging those two factors. Meanwhile, Ismi Arif found out that the youth became more motivated to be part of political activities if they have political literacy, political maturity, and the political landscape is conducive to their maturity and literacy. Now, what about literature regarding how the pandemic affected the youth political movement, the youth political action? Now, Jeffrey Players in his study found that the pandemic intensified social movements in general. And this is not just about youth, but among all citizens. But in Malaysia, the youth are the ones who act in conjunction with the pandemic. Nevertheless, Jeffrey Players proved that the pandemic intensified social movement, increased protests and strikes, and also increased the rate of information sharing within social media. That is the effect of the pandemic. Meanwhile, Jeff Corpus, in his study, supports Players' conclusion. Corpus showed in his study that the ASEAN leaders during the pandemic used the pandemic as an opportunity to increase their powers extra-legally without the consent of the parliament or the citizens. And that led to a lot of protests and demonstrations in the Philippines and Thailand. Now, the theoretical framework I will use to explain why there's an increasing amount of youth participation in Malaysian politics beginning from 2020 would be the SIRDA model, which is a theoretical social model developed by Peter Grant to explain increase in political activism among, Peter Grant didn't create it to explain among you, but rather among people who were protesting about the death of George Floyd. Nevertheless, it is useful in explaining the pattern of youth involvement in politics in Malaysia, because the basis of SIRDA is collective perception of injustice leads to social change. First, the unjust barriers, or at least perceived unjust barriers, can trigger collective action. First it makes various people believe that they are part of the same group because they are equally sharing the same misery. This misery comes from this unjust barrier. In Malaysia, it will be the pandemic. And this collective misery will create a common identity, which we call collective deprivation. And from this collective deprivation and this social identity that forms from this collective misery we're facing together, it will combine to become drivers of social change, because when people feel that they are part of the same struggle, they feel more empowered to protest, to vote in a certain way, because they feel like, because with this much support, we can do something about politics. Politics is no longer something inaccessible to us. It's not the games among, it's not just a game among the people in government. We have a sharing politics too from our collective deprivation. Now, for my research, the methodology would be the qualitative approach, meaning that instead of having a large pool of data, I would instead only have a small pool of data. But that small pool, I would gain as much information as I can from that small pool of data. And this way, the qualitative approach will help me to glean the individual experience of Malaysian youth within politics. But because the people I would be interviewing are leaders of their respective NGOs or um, student associations or various youth-based political organizations, meaning that they would speak as a collective for the entire organization, meaning I'm not just getting their individual experience, but also the individual experience of all the youth in those organizations. The method I would use now for this qualitative approach, I would use the semi-structured interviews. This it's an interview, but it's not too formal. It's a bit more casual, but I would have a prepared set of questions to ask them, and this will help gather in-depth information from each participant as much as I can. Now, the first result is about the opinions of the Malaysian youth regarding the competency of the government in handling the pandemic. And in this case, there are two opinions regarding the competency. First is that the government was incompetent. They had very weak decision-making process during the pandemic. They appointed people who were not qualified, who did not perform dutifully, and they were quite insensitive to the concerns of the people during the pandemic. And second opinion is about the constitution, meaning the participants in the study saw that the government was willing to break certain constitutional rules in order to handle the pandemic. And yes, indeed, it was emergency situation. However, breaking these constitutional rules in an emergency situation can set a dangerous precedent. Now, for our next results, let us look at the results that come from the views of Malaysian youth regarding their political tendency beginning from 2020. So from my research, I found out that the participants overwhelmingly believe that Malaysian youth have shown an increasing tendency to engage in politics since 2020, and this came from their experience in their political activities or their interaction with various Malaysian youth, whether in universities or outside of universities, such as in public settings. They noticed that since 2020, there is an increasing tendency of Malaysian youth to be involved in political matters such as demonstrations, campaigns, flash mobs, boycotts, or just social media interaction in general. So the participants in the study believe that there are two reasons why the youth began to become more motivated in political matters since 2020. So the first reason is the Undi 18 amendment. This is a government amendment which lowers the minimum voting age to 18, and participants in the study believe that this amendment increased the political efficacy of the youth because the youth feel like they have a higher chance of influencing political matters because now the voting age is lowered to 18, meaning there's a larger pool of Malaysian youth who can vote, meaning that now their opinions matter. So they began to be more motivated not only in just voting but also in voicing their political opinions or joining political campaigns or demonstrations or protests and all that. So the Undi 18 amendment. Now the second reason is social media. So during the pandemic, a lot of people were stuck in their homes under MCO. So they couldn't go out, they couldn't socialize outside. So what they do is they socialize in social media. So when they spend most of their time in social media, they began to be more aware of political matters. Not only just the political problems of the people in government, but also the problems of the Malaysian political system itself. So this interaction in social media also made them more and more motivated to be involved in political matters. So another result that we've seen is that the results of this research align with the Serder model theory that we use as our theoretical framework. First is the reinforcement of social identity. This, again, like we talked briefly about the Serder model. After the pandemic, when more and more people were stuck in their home, they became more engaged online, and this online engagement strengthened their social identity because they realized, oh, we have a shared misery. We all suffering under the same government. We are all equally suffering, and that fosters solidarity within the social space. And when this social identity is reinforced, it led to an increase in collective efficacy. Collective efficacy meaning that the more you feel like you are part of a larger group, the more likely you feel that you can enact change. And this active online interaction, where you become more and more aware of what other people go through, and that it becomes more and more easy to help support other people through GoFundMe or direct messages or just physically sending packages or whatnot. This help increase collective efficacy, especially since it's very easy to connect with other youth online. So now for our final results, which is based on the third objective, it's about how the Malaysian youth think the landscape of politics in Malaysia should change. So they believe in two things that should change. First is abolish AUKU. AUKU is the University and University Colleges Act. It's usually acts as a guideline on how a university should administer their environment. But oftentimes, AUKU is used to restrict the freedom of speech of students. So my participants overwhelmingly believe that AUKU should be abolished, not just amendment, not just enact amendments, but abolish entirely. And the second is a legislation for judiciary. They believe that the government should make the judiciary more independent, because right now, even though the judiciary is not as closely aligned with the executive government, the executive government still has an ability to influence the selection of members of the judiciary. So they want that to be changed, the judiciary completely independent from the government, so that they can act as a check to the power of the executive through their use of judicial review. So in conclusion, from this study, we can see that there is an increase in political activism among youth in Malaysia, especially since 2020. And secondly, we can see that the Serder model does fit with the situation of the Malaysian youth in 2020. Their political patterns are very similar to the theory proposed in the Serder model. Third is the youth, as we can see from their increasing collective efficacy and also various amendments like the Undi 18 amendment, the youth are poised to play an increasingly more influential role in Malaysian politics in the future. And fourth is that this study highlights that there needs to be more and more study, more and more research that accounts for ethnic, religious, gender, and regional diversity.